Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, I'll be right with you. Just trying to get the YouTube going and the screen share.
That's fine. Shavua Tov.
And to you.
Thanks. Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, I'll be right with you. Just trying to get the YouTube going and the screen.
Sorry, I didn't get that, Rabbi.
There was a recording, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Right. How you, Dave?
Fine, thanks. How are you doing, Rabbi?
Thank God. Are you deliberately anonymous today?
Yes, because I'm not dressed. I've been busy the whole morning and I just haven't had a chance to get dressed.
As long as your head is dressed.
Yes, it is. With the Sydenham yarmulke.
Oh.
As always.
Very good. Okay, my bell is ringing. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Oh, the Fiat. Yeah. Oh, right.
Cool. How are you feeling?
Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
Right, it's a minute past 1. We'll give it another minute or two and see who else is coming to learn today.
I'm not seeing. Oh, right.
Hello, Ken. Hello, Stephen. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Rabbi. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
By the way, my technical glitch last week was a loose cable. Pardon my technical ignorance.
Join the club.
I don't know what that means. Whatever that means.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, today we have a much more pleasant topic than previous weeks lately. And we're beginning a section on Para Aduma, the red heifer, which was used to purify the people who had become Tameh by contact with the dead, which, as you know by now, is the most intense form of Tumah. And who's having conversations and tea in the background?
Just my break. And no, it's called Korbaza. And
Anybody know where the background music is coming from?
I'm muted.
Everybody is muted. I don't understand where this noise is coming from. Unless Dave.
No.
No noise in your background? Oh, it's gone quiet. Okay, I can hear myself now. Okay, so let's get started. Para Aduma. Para means a cow, Aduma means red, the red heifer. And so this is the subject of, which we'll read in some weeks, in a couple of months actually, towards the end of the book of Bamidbar, Pashas Chukat in the Torah, deals with the red heifer, and it introduces it, Zot Chukat HaTorah. This is the chok, the statutory decree of the Torah. As you probably know, a chok is one of those handful of mitzvot of the 613 that we have not been given to understand. The Torah gives no reason for it. We take it on faith. Judaism is generally a very practical religion, very logical religion. Everything has a reason, but there are a handful of mitzvahs that we do not know the reason. We believe there is a higher reason, and God knows the reason, but He hasn't shared it with us. Maybe because it's so deep and infinite that we wouldn't get it. But be that as it may, there are certain mitzvahs that we take on faith, and this is the most, the strongest one of the lot that requires the greatest leap of faith, because it makes no logical, rational sense whatsoever. The whole idea of Tumah and Tara is a chok, a decree, not a rational mitzvah. Just because I touched something, I changed. I just washed my hands with soap. I used sanitizer, 70% alcohol. What's the problem? It's obviously a spiritual thing, which we don't necessarily understand logically. And likewise, the way to purify ourselves is also not necessarily understood rationally. So here, a person who became tamei from contact with the dead has to have the ashes of a red cow sprinkled on him. Now, if that doesn't sound weird, then I don't know what does. So it could be, if I had to ask you a quiz question, what's the weirdest mitzvah of all the 613? You probably would be right if you said the red heifer. To take, first of all, to find a red cow. Okay, it's not fire engine red, but it's still a rarity and quite expensive if you do find one. And then you have to shech it, and then you have to burn it on the altar, and then you take the ashes, and then you make a whole concoction, a formula with some other ingredients and special holy water, and you sprinkle it on these people, and presto, bingo, they are now purified. So this is definitely not a rationally understood mitzvah. It is the statutory decree of the Torah, the, with a capital V, and we take it on faith. But it does have very strict laws and regulations. And in order for it to be kosher and acceptable halachically, it has to meet a lot of stringent requirements. And if the slightest thing goes wrong, got to go back to go and find another cow. So there are stories in the Gemara about the lengths to which the Kohanim in charge had to go to find such a cow in the first place. And we'll learn later on in the Rambam here, who makes a very fascinating historical comment. And he says that in the history of the Jewish people, 9 red heifers were offered, total of 9, starting with Moshe's day. And the 10th one, says the Rambam, will be offered by none other than Mashiach himself. So we look forward. In fact, a year or two ago, there was an Israeli newspaper, a screaming headline that a red heifer was born in Israel. And all the spiritually minded people said, oh, Mashiach is around the corner. There's a red heifer now. Well, unfortunately, it didn't happen yet. So, but okay. That was just an introduction because this is the first chapter of a number of chapters. I think there's about a dozen chapters in this, or 10 or so, in this section. So I thought a few words of introduction were appropriate. Now let's get to the laws. So there are 2 mitzvahs to do with the red heifer. Number 1, the laws of the red heifer itself. Number 2, the laws of the impurity and purity brought about by the water used for the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer, which we'll not talk about in this chapter. This chapter, we're just going to talk about the cow itself and what requirements it has to be acceptable. Number 1, commandment the mother has to offer such an animal in its 3rd or 4th year of life. If it is older, it's still kosher, but we wouldn't wait for it to age, because the longer you wait, the hairs can go from red to black. You know, my hair is going from brown to gray. So maybe the red heifer gets older, he goes from red to black. I don't know. So you don't want to wait too long.
Mine is mostly gone.
Okay. Well, we can't have a bald heifer. We need a red heifer. Sorry, Dave, you don't qualify. The Jewish community does not purchase a calf, a little one, and then raise it till it's 3 or 4 years old, but rather you should take a heifer. So heifer, by definition, apparently heifer is not a calf. A calf is a baby, and a heifer is already a couple of years old. You know, how do the lions work? When the lions are born, they're cubs, and then they get a bit older. What are they called? Something else. Anyway, so if only a calf was found, a price is established, and it should remain in its owner's possession until it matures and becomes a cow, and then they purchase with money from the temple treasury. The Torah's description, it says, Timimah, para aduma timimah. Timimah from the word tamim means perfect. Now, it doesn't mean perfect in stature, you know, perfectly built animal. It means perfectly red, that it has to be completely red. It's a reddish brown. It's not fire engine red. So even if it's dwarf size, it's acceptable, as it will be acceptable for a sacrifice. But if it has even 2 white hairs or 2 black hairs growing from one follicle or from 2 cavities lying on top of each other, shine ice, it's no longer acceptable. So perfectly red means it can have a maximum of 1 hair that's not red. 2, and it's invalidated. 3, If there were two hairs, their roots reddish and their heads blackish, or their roots blackish and their heads reddish, the status follows the roots. Yeah. How do you know if a woman is a genuine blonde or a bleached blonde? You look at the roots, eh? One should cut off the blackish head with scissors. He need not be concerned about the prohibition against shearing consecrated animals, because he's not really shearing. He's not looking for the wool. Enough of the red hair must remain so that it can be pulled out by tweezers. So in order for the tweezer to grasp hold of the hair, it has to be at least the minimum size. Otherwise, you can't even grab it. So that's the minimum. Therefore, if there were two white or black hairs that are so small that they cannot be pulled out by tweezers, it's still acceptable. It's not called a hair yet. If its horns or hooves are black, they may be cut off and it's acceptable. The color of the eyeballs, the teeth, and the tongue do not disqualify a heifer. So when we say perfectly red, we don't mean every single part of the animal. We mean the hair, basically. If it had an abnormal growth of another color and one cut it off, even though red hair grew in its place, it's unacceptable. 7. Any physical blemishes, a mum in Hebrew, that would disqualify any ordinary animal from being offered as a sacrifice on the holy altar in the temple, would similarly disqualify the para aduma, because it says in Hebrew in the Parshas Chukas, Asher ein bo mum. So you have to take a para aduma tmima, Asher ein bo mum, that has no flaw, no blemish whatsoever. If it was born by cesarean section, not acceptable. If it was exchanged for a dog, or was a present given to a prostitute, or was treifa, which means torn and terminally ill, or had been sodomized by anyone, all of the above make it unacceptable. It's got to be holy, not tainted by all of those unholy stuff. For any fact that invalidates a sacrificial animal for the altar will invalidate the red heifer as well. It's compared to a sin offering. It is permitted to purchase a red heifer from a non-Jew. In fact, the Gemara has a famous story where they found a non-Jew a farmer who had a red heifer, and the Kohanim came to buy it, and the guy was sleeping. And they spoke to his son. And the son refused to wake up his father, even to sell a red heifer for a gigantic amount of money. And we use that as an example of a non-Jewish kid who observed the mitzvah of honoring his father in the highest degree. And they were blessed because of that. It is permitted to, we don't suspect that the Gentile sodomized it, for it would destroy the value of his animal. Why would he do that? There is a more severe element to the red heifer than in normal sacrifices. In a normal animal, there's no problem if the animal did work, if it was used to plow in the field. That's not a problem. The red heifer, it says, Asher loy olo oleho oil. It says it has to be an animal upon which a yoke was never placed. You never put a harness or a yoke on the animal. It says, Asher loy ubad bo, a calf which was never worked. Well, that actually says by the Egla Arufa, when they find a guy murdered in the roadway and they don't know who killed him. There's a whole ceremony there. But we derive laws from one to the other because there are some similar qualifications of what you have. There you have to take a calf whose neck is broken, but it also had to be an animal which no work was performed and which was not led with the yoke. So it applies to the para aduma. A yoke disqualifies the red heifer whether it was placed upon it during work or not during work, and any other forms of labor disqualified only when work was actually performed. Meaning, let's say you tied a yoke on the red heifer, it's disqualified even if you didn't work with it. If you place it in a threshing team with other animals, it's not disqualified unless it actually threshed, unless it actually worked. If you rode on it, you went for a ride on the bucking bronco, or you leaned on it, you just rested on it, you were tired and you leaned on this red heifer, or you hung on to its tail, or you were crossing a river with the red heifer, the Serengeti or something, and you used it for support while swimming, or you folded its lead rope on top of it, or placed your garment on it. You were hot, you took off your jacket, and you laid it down on the animal, just to put it there. You used the animal for your personal mundane use. Not big work, didn't perspire from all this work, but it was used for some form of work for your benefit, and that will amazingly disqualify the para aduma from being used. So no manner of work may it be used for. If one tied it with a rope because it was rebellious and needed to be safeguarded, that's okay. But if you didn't do it for other reasons, then it's not okay. If one shod its hooves so that it would not slip, or spread his garment over it, not because you needed a place to put your garment, but you're protecting the animal from the flies. You're living in Melbourne and there's lots of flies, and you put your garment over it to protect it from the flies. That's not work. There you're helping the animal. No problem. The principle, the rule, if anything is done for its own needs, it's still acceptable. If it's done for another purpose, not for its own needs, but for you, then it is disqualified. When work was performed with it that as a matter of course, or a yoke was placed as a matter of course, meaning it wasn't deliberate, but if the owner is pleased that there's a yoke on it, it's disqualified. So here, if a bird rested on it, that doesn't disqualify the animal. I mean, nobody puts his birds on an animal. We don't control the birds. The birds go fly in and out, and you always see these birds on the rhinos and all kinds of things. So here's a bird who decided to take a rest on the back of the red heifer. No problem. That's not work. It wasn't doing it for us. But if a male mounted it, it's unacceptable. Needless to say, a pregnant heifer is unacceptable. You placed it among a team of animals and it threshed grain on its own accord, not because you wanted it to be work for you. It's kosher. If you placed it among the team so that it would nurse and thresh, it's disqualified because that's what he wants them to do for you. And that's the basic rule which would apply in all it. If it's work that you want it to do for you, it disqualifies it. If it just does work by itself, nothing to do with you, it's not a problem. 8, when a disqualifying factor invalidates the heifer, it should be redeemed. Okay, so now it was set aside as a red heifer, then it became disqualified for whatever reason. So what do you do with it now? You can't bring it to the temple. So you redeem it, meaning you give the temple the value of it, and then you could use it for a braai or whatever you want. Similarly, if it dies, it should be redeemed so that its hide can be used, because until it's redeemed, it sort of has a sacred status. But you should not feed it the meat to the dogs. Pasnit, not nice. 9, if it was slaughtered to be used as an ordinary animal, it should be redeemed and it does not bring about atonement. If it was slaughtered on top of the arrangement of wood set up for burning it, it can never be redeemed. So I didn't know what this meant, and I had to look it up today, which I did. In Rabbi Steinsaltz's Rambam set, he gives reasons for lots of stuff, and I found the answer there. What does this mean? It's the last part of number 9. if it was slaughtered on top of the arrangement of wood set up for burning it, it can never be redeemed. In other words, it was disqualified, or it was shechted for your own purposes, not as a red heifer, but it was shechted in the place on the Temple Mount where the red heifer normally is shechted. So you took a red heifer, but it's not going to be used as a red heifer for whatever reason, and now you shechted it on the place where it's normally used. It can never be redeemed. You messed up. Why? Because it's sacrilegious and disrespectful to use the same spot in the temple that is used for the proper para aduma, holy offering, for your own personal use. If it's not being used for para aduma, then it had no business being there. So that was wrong to do it there, and therefore it's sort of a penalty that it can never be redeemed. 10. If a red heifer was purchased and then one found a more attractive one. Oh, nothing wrong with this one, but you got an even better one. The first one may be redeemed, even if it's not blemished. It's perfectly fine. But you just got a more handsome specimen. 11. Okay, now, who must perform the ceremony of the red heifer? Does it have to be the Kohen Gadol? The answer is no. It can be any Kohen. Even an ordinary priest, a Kohen Hedyot, is kosher to perform the burning of the red heifer. We read in Numbers, Moshe was told to give it to Elazar. At that time, Aaron, his father, was the Kohen Gadol, and he was still alive. So clearly, Elazar was not the Kohen Gadol. So if he could do it, then any non-Kohen Gadol can do it. So our oral tradition teaches the red heifer was offered by Elazar. The remainder of red heifers could be offered either by the Kohen Gadol or an ordinary priest, whichever. By the way, you should know that the law in general is any service in the temple. I wonder if you knew this. Any service in the temple that the Kohen Gadol decides he would like to perform personally, he has first rights. Whatever the service, any service. It could be a service that he doesn't have to do. Yom Kippur, he's very busy. Everything had to be done by the Kohen Gadol in person. But let's say on an ordinary Wednesday or Monday, and he decides he wants to do something, or he decides he wants to do the red heifer burning, which he doesn't have to, but if he'd like to, if it's meaningful to him, he gets first rights. Nobody can refuse him. That's just a side halacha that's interesting to know. The person offering the red heifer should wear the 4 garments of an ordinary Kohen, which means even if the Kohen Gadol is doing it, he only wears the 4 garments, not the 8 that he has. The full regalia of the Kohen Gadol is not worn. 13, all of those who are involved in the offering of the red heifer from the beginning to the end who had immersed that day. Okay, so now let me just introduce the final few halachas. There is let me just scroll down a second. What happened to the notes? There's no notes? How could it be there's no notes?
We haven't
Yeah,
had
they-
notes for a long time, Rabbi.
Yeah,
What happened?
Rabbi
couple of
What
Rabbi Bacher was following up with it, but I haven't heard anything.
Okay, so I have notes in a book here in front of me. I want to read you something because it's relevant to the next few halachas. You'll see here, where is it? Sadducees at the very end. You see Sadducees here where I'm showing you? Excuse me. So let me just tell you about the Sadducees, which in Hebrew is called Tzedokim. There was a man named Tzadok, who was a student of the famous Antignos of Socha, who is quoted in Pirkei Avot. And this Tzadok rebelled against the Torah, because his teacher Antignos taught him Pirkei Avot, don't be like a servant who serves God for a reward. Be like a servant who does it altruistically for no reward. And Tzadok says, what? I should do all this stuff for no reward? I'm out of here. And he rebelled against the Torah. And he and his colleagues forsook Jewish practice because there was no reward, they thought. And they began a splinter sect with the intent of trying to get as many people to follow them. At first, they sought to influence people to abandon Jewish tradition completely, but they saw that the people would not accept this. So then they changed their tune and they said, okay, we will follow the Torah, the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. But the Talmud, the Mishnah, the rabbis, the oral tradition, that's rubbish, man. Those rabbis say this, I can say that, no problem. So they only followed the Torah, often literally. And as we know, those who've studied Torah know that if you follow the Torah literally, it can be very confusing. And we need rabbinic interpretation to understand what does it mean. For example, the mitzvah of tefillin, and you shall place them as a sign on your hand. So what do I have to hold a parchment of like a mezuzah in my hand? And they should be frontlets or whatever between your eyes. Must I take a parchment and put it on top of my nose and between my eyes? So we would never know what tefillin is or where or how to wear them if we didn't have the Talmud to explain it to us based on the between the lines and the oral tradition that we received from Moshe. So there are many things that the Tzedokim did which were not pleasing to the rabbis and which were incorrect. One of them was to do with becoming purified after going to the mikveh. There are certain tumas where you go to the mikveh during the day and then you have to wait until nightfall. And when night falls, you become tahor. You are now pure. There are certain things that you become pure from immediately once you go to the mikveh, even in the afternoon, and other things that you have to wait till nightfall. So this is one of the areas where the Tzdokim, the Sadducees, argued with the rabbis and went against Torah law. So let's look at 11. Sorry, not 11. 13. All of those who were involved in the offering of the red heifer, who had immersed, who had been in the mikveh that day, are accepted for the services served with the red heifer, to consecrate the water used for sprinkling the ashes on the people who were tamei, even though they did not wait until the nightfall after their immersion. Okay? The rationale being that the Torah used the word ish tahor, a pure man, in the story of the red heifer. That term is used and refers to one who is pure with regard to partaking of the second tithe, even though he's not pure with regard to partaking of truma until nightfall. So truma, which belongs to the Kohen, was stricter than the second tithe, which anybody could eat in Jerusalem. And so our law, Torah law, is that even if you went to the mikveh, but you did not yet wait for nightfall, you're a Kohen, you may perform the service of the Parah Adumah, which the Sadducees disagreed with. They would say that the offering of heifer was acceptable only when those bringing it had waited until nightfall after immersion, and we say no. Therefore, in the second temple, the Bezdin, the court, would dafke, as a matter of principle, they would make the Kohen become Tomei, so that he would go to the mikveh on the day, was a minor tumah, and that he would, for certain things, have to wait till nightfall, but to make the point that he could very well perform the Parah Adumah service even before nightfall, to negate the erroneous ruling of the Sadducees, the court would cause the Kohen who burned the red heifer to become ritually impure through contact with the carcass of a crawling animal or the like, which is not as serious as a dead body of a human. Excuse me. Sorry. He would then immerse in the mikveh and offer the red heifer to nullify, to negate the words of these brazen ones, those chutzpanyaks, those Sadducees who went against the Torah, who issued rulings according to their whims without basis of the received tradition that we received directly all the way back from Moshe Rabbeinu. Similarly, all of the containers into which the ashes of the red heifer were placed were all immersed that day. Dafke, to show that the Sadducees were wrong and we don't follow them. So the Sadducees, they went against Talmudic law, against the oral law, and they followed only the biblical law literally, but because they didn't follow the true tradition, the authentic tradition that was handed down to us from Moshe of how to interpret the Torah, sometimes they were more lenient, and sometimes they were more strict. For example, when it came to Shabbos, the Sadducees were more strict. Here's another example where Jewish tradition does something dafke to negate the Sadducees' opinion. Who knows what it is about Shabbos? Anybody know? What do we do on Shabbos dafke to show that the Sadducees were wrong? The answer is we enjoy a hot cholent on Shabbos day. The Sadducees said you shall not, the Torah said you shall not burn a fire on Shabbos. Our tradition, the Talmudic tradition, says don't light a fire on Shabbos. It doesn't mean that if you lit the fire before Shabbos, it can't continue to burn on Shabbos. So we dafka say, guys, we want you to dafka have a hot dish on Shabbos lunch, which simmered on the fire all night Friday night to negate the mistaken view of the Sadducees that you may not enjoy any fire or light even. They sat in darkness the whole Shabbos. They didn't have a hot food the whole Shabbos because of their ridiculous interpretations. So we dafke have a hot dish on Shabbos, so cholent is not only delicious, it's actually a mitzvah. Okay. Finally, for the same reason, the person who cuts the stalk of a reed to place the ashes of a red heifer upon it, so that can be placed in water to consecrate it for sprinkling, should make it impure, immerse it, and then place the ashes on it. The same idea. The one who cuts it, the one who immerses, must immerse himself because that reed was considered as an entity that came in contact with the corpse on the seventh day of his purification process. Therefore, does not need to have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled. Instead, it is made impure just to show the Sadducees that the oral tradition must be upheld. So it'll be immersed and then the ashes are placed on it. So we make a point to show that they are wrong and we follow rabbinic Talmudic tradition to understand what Torah law actually, what biblical law actually means. Quick quiz and then we'll go back to work. What law do we derive from the Torah's command that Elazar the priest be the one to burn the red heifer in the desert? A, B, or C? Unmute yourselves and give us the answer.
C.
C is correct. Thank you very much. May a tvul yom be involved with preparing the red heifer. A tvul yom is the Hebrew term for the person who immersed during the day. He toveled in the Yom, Tivul Yom, immersed during the day, but did not wait for nightfall. May he be involved in preparing the red heifer? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Answer is correct. You've been listening. Very good. Which of the following do not disqualify the red heifer? Two of these three do disqualify it. One does not. Which one?
Number one.
Number one is correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
And finally, what is the ideal age for a red heifer? 18 or 29?
3 or 4 years old.
Correct.
Cool.
You guys are genii. Perfect scores. Well done. Well
But we
done.
didn't know about the Sadducees, Rabbi, so we can't be that good.
Well, you learn. So, well, that's why you come here to learn a few things, right?
Exactly. They're very fascinating.
Okay.
If
Here are
you
my plans to become a Sadducee. Damn it.
if you read the New Testament, you'll learn all about the Sadducees.
Oh,
Because-
Rabbi. Cheers, everyone.
Yoska,
Tigers learn.
Yoska and his crowd came from them.
Really? Okay. If you say so.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
thank
All the
you.
best, everyone. Have a great week. Thanks for joining. Cheers.
Shavua tov, Shavua tov.
We were